Thank you, sir. Our first session is a fireside chat on evolving labor laws, MSME perspective. For that, I would like to invite our moderator, Mr. R. Srinivasan, co-chairperson, MSME Forum, Bombay Chamber, and director, IRA Consulting Private Limited, and our speaker, Mr. Lancy D'Souza, advocate and legal advisor, Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to please join us on the race.
Arey, before we could get the mic done, you have started the timer. So I think you should give us some extra time. Right. So this is possibly the most interesting and possibly the most scary topic that we can have. We open the session with Mr. Mathur's motivating discussion saying, oh, there's a great opportunity. And then we bring in a Lancy D'Souza who talks about labor laws. You can't have a more, fantastic structuring of the agenda. But Lancy, thank you so much for taking your time. He's an extremely busy lawyer, but like Mr. Rajesh said, always available for us for advice. So let me start with, we had a fantastic session on Jan 21st, right, as part of MSME 3.0. And that time things were a little fluid. The rules were not there, the codes were there, but the rules had not come. 8th of May, the central government had released the rules. So can you quickly take us through what are the rules and what are the specifics of the rules? Some very high level, not maybe specifics.
Thank you. Happy to be here amongst you. The rules have come from the central government that may not apply to all of you here. Those would apply only to public sector and central government organizations and the aviation sector, the insurance sector.
Take it further.
You will have to now await the rules to be framed by the state government to see what you need to implement and how you need to implement. Now, broadly, the state rules will not differ very much from the central rules because you cannot have state and central rules which are inconsistent to each other. So broadly, what the central rules say, the states will also say that. Now, some of the important points that have come out in the central rules is if you are a principal employer and if your contractor's employee has any issue, he has to go to the principal employer first. He need not go to the contractor. The principal employer has to form a committee to look into the grievances of the contract labor. Now, the difficulty that comes in is, if you have got about 80 contractors, are you going to have a committee of 80 persons, one from each contractor? Now, that will be the difficulty in implementation of that. And if you are unable to resolve this issue, then you as a principal employer, you will have to write to the labor enforcement officer that this contract worker has got a problem, I cannot resolve it, the committee cannot resolve it, you please resolve it. Now, this is a major change which has come. Now, it is not there in the code, but it has come in the rules. Now, the legality of that will have to be tested. What the code doesn't say, can the rule go beyond the code and say something which is not there? That is one. The second thing, what has come out there is the procedure for non-compliances. There is good and bad in every law. We say it helps the ease of doing business. When it says there is an ease of doing business, there is a disease of non-compliance, which you have to look. There are various steps and processes which are not really required, but they have been put in the rules. We cannot go into those details for paucity of time, but those offenses are there, and those jurisdiction to try offenses have been given to the government officers. Some of them may not even be law graduates, we do not know. And they are going to decide offenses under laws. And they have got powers to summon you and hand over a conviction. So these are the two major things which, to my mind, are important for us to know. Others are mostly procedural. They tell you how to implement the code.
So, what one understands from a broad reading of the code is that the rules is that there are a lot of laws, a lot of offenses have been decriminalized. The jail term has been removed and they've all made into penalties and this and that. Is that right? I mean, is the understanding right?
See, decriminalization, it's a matter of interpretation. Even a fine is a criminal offense. It's
Yeah, I
an offense
agree.
for
I agree.
criminal. What is decriminalization is they say we'll let you off with fines. But there's a catch. They say we'll let you off with a fine at the first offense. If you repeat that offense in the next 5 years, we will not allow you to go scot-free with a fine. Now they are not saying this when they say decriminalization. What is decriminalization is I have no punishment at all. The moment there is a punishment, whether by way of a fine or a jail sentence, it is a sentence. You can't say they have decriminalized.
Yeah, it's a fair point. That's a real fair point, absolutely. So coming back to the earlier point that you talked about, the contractor. A lot of MSMEs use, contract worker. I mean, there is no choice but not to use it. So somebody may have 15 workers who is on roll, and then there are 55 workers who are off roll. And for 55 workers, you'd never get a contractor who provides you 55. So you'll have 3 or 4 contractors, so somebody providing 10, 15, and things like that, depending upon how the work goes up and down. So what is this committee? I mean, the principal employer is supposed to create a committee is one. Number two, what could be the reason why a contractor worker will reach a principal employer? Because usually that access is blocked in most organizations.
But that is what now the law says. That is why it says that was not there in the law earlier. It is not there in the code. It is coming here for the first time. Normally, a contract worker has to take his grievances to his employer. And if it doesn't get resolved, he has to take it to the labor officer.
But that's precisely the reason why somebody gets a contractor.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. But now the difficulty is when the draft rules were circulated, none of the employers objected to this. That is why the draft rules are circulated. There was no objection, but that doesn't mean that if there is no objection, some rule which is ultra virus the act can be enforced.
Absolutely.
Now this will call for a challenge as and when an occasion arises.
In the last MSME conclave, and some of them might have attended, some might not have attended, so for their benefit, the labor code did not differentiate between an employee and a worker, right? And that was a bone of contention last time also. Has that got clarified? Has it become a little easier for people to understand? Because the Factory Act is very clear about the worker. It was, right? Now it's got subsumed into all this. So there was an employee, there was managerial staff, and there was worker. Somewhere along the line, this has got mixed. Has the clarity come on that?
The rules will not clarify on this. You have to look at the main code. The definition in the code is very clear. To implement those definitions, you don't need the rules. Now, to put it in a very simple way, the term employee includes everyone who is on your rolls. But a term worker will include only those who are skilled, unskilled, semi-skilled, operational, technical. Now, if you have to look at implementation of the codes, when you look at a person, you should know whether he is an employee or he is a worker. Today, what is the industry practice? Call everyone an executive. Call everyone an officer. Now, what is coming is, what is important is not what you call him. What is important is what he does. So you have to forget the designation part, focus on what he does, and based on what he does, whether he falls under employee or he falls under a worker.
So will that differentiation be taken? For example, somebody who's in sales is not a worker, right? Somebody who's in accounts is not a worker. So will that differentiation be?
Now, they have included persons doing sales promotion work also. Except those who are in the managerial capacity. They have included persons who are doing sales promotion. So they are included. Now, accounts department, just because a person is doing accounts work, he doesn't cease to be a worker. But if he has responsibilities, he supervises people working under him, he manages your work, he has got powers, then he'll move from worker to employee.
Okay, so somebody who's a BCom and joins an accounts department as a fresh accounts, whatever, we call him accounts officer, executive, whatever it is. He will be classified as a worker?
Yeah, it depends on what he does. If
I
he's
mean,
merely making entries,
Yeah, absolutely.
he will be a worker.
Okay. So he'll be entitled to all the worker-related
Protections and benefits.
benefits, okay, including unionization. Including being part of a union?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, if you see the chapter on trade union, now this is where I feel that the trade union movement is going to revive. And it has happened. We can see it in the north. It has been happening. The chapter on trade unions and recognition of trade unions, for that chapter, the term worker is separately defined. It means anyone who is on the roll. Recently, there was a case in Madras where there was an election for who is the majority union. Then the question came, who is entitled to vote? Will it be only the workers, or it could be even the managers? The Madras High Court said even managers can vote, because under the definition of worker for the trade unions, everyone is included. So this is going to have a severe dent on industrial relations.
So I think there is one more sort of confusion that people have been grappling with. A lot of our members and also some of our clients, we have been working on this issue. There is a difference between Shop and Establishment Act and code that defines worker, employee differently, this staff differently. I mean, how do you reconcile this difference?
See, each statute has a definition for the purpose for which that statute is made. Now, the Shops Act deals with your leave, working hours, weekly off, rest days, etc. So there the definition is different. But if you see the Maharashtra Shops and Establishments Act 2017, which is amended, their managers, supervisors, they are all excluded. It again applies to only workers.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the difficulty which is coming now is this. I am covered under the Shops Act. Now, none of the codes have repealed the Shops Act. Now, what do? Do I follow the State Act, Shops Act, or do I follow the Central Act, which is the code, where working hours are concerned?
Absolutely.
Where working hours are concerned. It is 9 and 48 in the Shops Act. It is 8 and 48 in the codes. What do I follow? The answer to that is in Article 254 of the Constitution of India, which says if there is a central law and a state law governing the same field, and in case of any inconsistency, the central law, which has got the consent of the president, would prevail. So look at the state law, look at the central law, and if there's any inconsistency, but both should provide for the same thing. Now, I'll give you an example. Leave encashment, accumulation of leave. The Shops Act says 45 days, 48 days or 45 days.
45.
But the code says 30 days. Now, what are you going to follow? 45 is beneficial or 30 is beneficial? The answer is when both acts provide for the same thing, follow the central, not the state. Suppose the codes did not have a provision of leave encashment, then you follow the state.
Okay, so that sort of clarifies, follow the central law as per the constitution. Now, a lot of MSMEs operate in two states. So Gujarat is sort of adjoining to us. So they will have a plant near in Vapi, and then they will also have a plant in, say, Khalapur or Airoli or that side. So how do they reconcile with, the rules might be different in the two states. So how do you reconcile with the two?
See, the rules do not provide for entitlements. Now, say for example, the leave provisions. Earlier, the leave was governed by state-specific Shops and Establishments Act. Now, you could not have a uniform leave policy, because if you have a uniform leave policy, you will be hit in some state. So, what companies had an option of following what is the highest in any state. Now, today, that entitlement comes from the code. So, the rules will not provide for leave entitlement. They may provide for a procedure for leave. So what the code provides today, the leave provisions, they are uniform pan-India. So
Okay.
that issue will
Sort of resolve itself.
Resolve.
Okay. Now, a very difficult question for our people, not for you. I mean, you have been doing it for, before I open the question for floor. One of the biggest problems today is, in MSMEs is the structuring of the salary. A lot of people have been giving some standard amounts. Somebody has been paying 20,000 rupees, somebody is paid 26,000 rupees, 30,000 rupees. And the structuring is, based on convenience. So somebody has given a basic as 25%, somebody has given 70% as basic. It's a legacy issue. Now suddenly the rules say that it has to be 50%. For somebody who has been giving at 25%, the entire math goes halfway. Somebody who has been generous enough to give 70, 75%, also the math goes halfway. on two areas. One is the PF contribution by the company and also the gratuity payouts, right? So how do people now reconcile their salary structure along with this?
One of the most controversial issues in implementing the codes was on wages. Earlier, an employer was free to decide how much to pay and how to pay. Therefore, you had those wage structures where there is a basic and plenty of allowances. And when you have no idea what name should be given to the allowance, you put other allowance. So all that was
Special
happening.
allowance is another.
Special allowance, other allowance, but there's nothing special about it. It's just being paid. Today, the law has kept that prerogative with you, how much to pay. But how to pay, the law has decided that. You no longer have that freedom of deciding how to pay. The law says, I will consider this much as your salary for social security benefits, and this much will be the exclusions. No matter what label you give, how you classify. So that power of how to pay has been taken away from you. And it has been substituted with a definition of wages in the codes. Now coming back to that, if your wage structure was such, the 25% was wages and rest were excluded allowances. Now there will be an add back and it will go up to 50%. So they say no matter what you show in your pay slip, as law, I will look at it with these lenses.
So the PF and other components will fall on that.
So that is the best part of it is, earlier the definition of wages used to differ from act to act. I fit wages under Minimum Wages Act, I get hit under gratuity. I fix under PF Act, I get hit under Minimum Wages Act. Now that is gone. The definition of wages is uniform and common for all the codes. And today you are certain, you know for sure that what will be wage and what will not be a wage. So resultantly, the litigation on PF non-compliances, ESI non-compliance, they will reduce. Because we say the law says 50%, I am paying on 50%. What more can you take? So there is a clarity on what has to be included and what should not be included. Now I will just give you a little tip on what are the things that are excluded. Now if you look at the definition of wage, it says all remuneration including salary, allowances, and there is a very dangerous word called otherwise, which no one knows. And that is just like sitting on the fence and jumping on either side. When the stage comes, they will say otherwise means this. And when we fix the structure, we'll say otherwise meant this. So there are only 3 exclusions in allowances. Overtime allowance, house rent allowance, and conveyance allowance. Only 3 allowances are excluded. Otherwise, everything has to come under clause E. What does clause E say? An amount paid to defray special expenses arising out of his employment. So today what industry is doing is, industry is playing around with E. Let me see how much quantum I can bring it under E. Because HRA is gone, OT is gone, conveyance is gone. I have to bring it under E. Now what people are doing is they are putting something like called a grooming allowance. Now what's a grooming allowance? He is in marketing. He needs to look presentable. He needs to change his wardrobe frequently. He needs to have n number of deos with him. So he has to spend, I'm giving it to him over there. Now this grooming allowance will not apply for other categories down the line. Some people are giving something called as professional development allowance. What is that? He has to do some courses, he has to get some certifications. But you're not going to get it every month. You're not going to get it every month. So that's a dangerous thing. So when you're working on your wage structure, except these 3 allowances, all other allowances will be a wage unless you bring it in clause E.
Okay, so that sort of clarifies a little better. Another unique MSME situation is people who are a little high skilled. In a manufacturing organization, there could be a design engineer who's very, very qualified, has been in the system for fairly long, or there could be a very senior salesperson who has got very good contacts in the market, or maybe an accountant, right? Now, in the normal course of employment, he superannuates at whatever, 58, 60, depending upon what it is. But the person is so critical that the employer doesn't want to let go of him, right? Or her, many times. So they say, we close the account, we give you a good farewell party, whatever it is, clap hands, whatever it is, and then you put him under a consultant, him or her under a consultant, and life continues as long as that person wants to work. What one understands is this consulting arrangement will also come under the code, and therefore PF and gratuity and everything is payable.
This is just like, having a farewell and telling him, see you again. After 2 days, he's back. Now, the question is, would that see you again put you in a compliance-related issue? Now, when you look at a consultant, there are some people who are just named consultants, and then some people who are genuine consultant. A genuine consultant does not work for you alone, he works for several. And he's an expert and he gives you advice. Now, in a scenario, as Srini said, he may be an engineer, just an engineer, and because of his competency levels, you want to retain him post-retirement. And you call him a consultant. Would there be a compliance burden on you for such consultants? My answer would be first, yes, because if you look at the definition of worker and an employee, there is no age limit there. It does not say a worker means a person employed below the age of so-and-so and not above the age of so-and-so. So age doesn't come there at all, unless it's for PF, where he has superannuated. And now what I would advise you is, it is not totally foolproof, but it can minimize your risks. And we have done it in many cases now. When you give a letter of appointment to such a person, say that you are engaged on a non-exclusive basis. The moment you say it's non-exclusive, it takes him out of the purview of employment. You look at a letter of appointment, you bind him to your organization. You say that while you are employed with me, you will not be employed anywhere else, work for anyone, do anything without my permission. So here, you are not exclusive to me, you are free to do your work. Then a question comes, then how is that he is working only for you and no one else? So the answer to that is his choice, not mine. He may feel working for me and getting income from me is sufficient for him. He may decide not to work for anyone else. That is one, non-exclusive basis. Second is, your letter of appointment should be very well drafted. It should not be an appointment letter which you give to your regular employees. In this letter of appointment, the word employee and the work should not come anywhere. Professional. This is an arrangement. Don't call it an employment contract. This arrangement will be for a period of so and so years. Don't use the word work, don't use the word employee, don't use the word employment and make it non-exclusive.
So that's interesting.
Pay a professional fees.
That's interesting. And then you do the TDS deduction and do it.
Yeah.
One last question before, I have too many questions, Lancy, by the way, is there is one understanding when we speak to some other legal consultants and lawyers, they say that the code is applicable for SMEs or organizations which are above 300 workers, employers, 300 workers. It's not applicable to people below. Is that understanding true?
No, that is not correct.
Okay.
What applies to 300 plus are two things. One is the certified standing orders. It does not apply if you are less than 300. Number two, if you are less than 300, if you want to retrench, close down or lay off, then you don't have to take the permission from the government. Beyond that, nothing. The labor codes apply even to a person who has got a single employee.
Okay.
Of course, for bonus, gratuity, there's a threshold of 10, 20, 10, etc. But the codes apply to everyone. The threshold is not 300, except for two things: termination and standing orders.
Standing orders, okay. So that sort of, we still have a lot of questions. So if anybody has, we have very little time, maybe a couple of questions if anybody has. And then, the gentleman there, can somebody pass the mic, please? So request you to keep the questions very short and not procedural.
Thank you, Mr.
Please.
D'Souza, for your valuable inputs.
Can't hear you, sir.
I got one question. If we are paying some joining bonuses to the new people to avoid this, this. So where will it be this one consider in inclusive or non-inclusive? That is a one-time payment.
Yeah. Now, under the new definition, there are three buckets. Now you'll have to pay me overtime.
I am also entitled to it.
And there are three buckets. Okay. One is where everything is included. One is those are exclusions, but they are counted for that add back of 50%. And a third bucket is where they are neither included nor excluded. For example, performance bonus. It is strictly linked to performance. It is neither a wage nor an exclusion. It is totally in the third bucket. Now this joining bonus, what you're saying, it's although you call it joining bonus, it has to be shown. You should have a policy. If you're giving joining bonus, now with this new definition, every payment should have a policy. Why are you paying that? Now this joining bonus, you can classify that as an incentive for him to join, one-time payment. So it will not be a wage, either in the inclusions or in the exclusions. It will go into the third bucket.
So that sort of clarifies.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any one last question? Anybody has? Otherwise, we can close the session. Yeah. Please pass the mic here, please.
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name is Vijay Bhatia. I run a chemical manufacturing company with 100 plus employees.
Sorry, how many employees?
100 plus.
100 plus.
Yeah. So I have a very different kind of a question. We employ high salaried salespeople in our company, and whatever salary they ask for, we give it to them. And we have well-defined KRAs, KPIs, targets, etc. with them. Can we make it legally enforceable that we are giving you this salary and this incentive, and you have to ensure this much of performance? And if they do not perform, then what?
No, what you're saying is a performance-linked payment.
Yes,
Now, you can have a performance-linked payment,
yes.
but there has to be a guaranteed payment at least to the extent of minimum wages.
That is ensured.
Once you have that, then you can have a performance-linked payment, and you can have your own scheme for that. But the scheme should be bona fide. And if someone questions, then you have to show it with documents. This is the scheme. This is how his performance was measured. This is how his performance was monitored. You'll have to show that. Merely calling it a performance allowance without any backup documents will not help you. Have a policy,
Yes.
have proper appraisals, and maintain your records.
Thank you.
So that's somewhat amount of time we have. But Lancy and Advocate Deepika are available. They are on record of Bombay Chamber of Commerce, and they are more than happy to assist MSMEs. If you have any queries, please mail it to us at ld@bombaychamber.com. They'll be more than happy to assist, whether it is a procedural or clarifications or something of that kind. Please feel free to write to us, and we'll be more than happy to assist. I have your permission to say that. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dev.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our moderator and speaker for sharing their valuable perspective. I request Mr. Rajan Raje, Chairperson MSME Forum Bombay Chamber, to please present mementos to our speakers as a token of appreciation. A big round of applause. To R. Srinivasan as well. Thank you so much.